3, 2, 1. A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. That would be through chapter 65 of Brandon Sanderson's The Hero of Ages.
Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
Crossland missed his cue, so I, being the better co-host, took over his role. And he, like the dictator that he is, decided we had to stop and restart, so he had his own words first. Bastard.
It's true, especially because you introduced yourself as me. You ever like catch yourself staring at something? Like
no,
I was staring at the text and not reading it when it was my turn. You know, like all of those movies in which there's an anchor staring at the text that's in front of them that they're supposed to read off the teleprompter, but they just stare there for a little bit too long, like off Newsroom. Favorite TV show. Well, second favorite now, but like staring at it and they're just like, that doesn't seem real. Like I can't. I did that, but with our intro, that's the same every fucking week.
Yeah. That also happens in Wilfred.
It does. It does.
Which is another great TV show.
That is a fantastic TV show of which I greatly adore and only watched because you told me that it was good. But needless to say, PJ, today is our 9th episode discussing The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson, and we are going to chat about chapters 59 through 65. Before we do that, though, we've got to continue our dry July and talk about tonight's mocktails. PJ, what are you having?
I have a homemade strawberry, rhubarb, rosemary, lavender lemonade. And I know that all of those ingredients are in it. Don't know, like I know there's also sugar and water. Those are all the ingredients. Do not know the ratios because Kaylin made this. But it's really, really tasty. We have rhubarb that we have growing in our garden. We grow rosemary and we grow lavender. So we collected all that from our house and then just lemon juice and sugar, making a sort of syrup and then la. You know how to make lemonade from there.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people don't know that the trick to making a good homemade lemonade is actually making a syrup as opposed to just going straight sugar. And that lets you get in some of these other flavors really effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's super, super good. So we made a big batch of it and put it in these nice little handy jars that have little caps. So I've been taking them to work. We've been taking them to the pool. It's been fun, but
nice.
Yeah, it's not quite a mocktail, but I think it's tasty.
I mean, I think that the lemonade is often kind of used as a mocktail-esque thing or like a base. So, I mean, and it's complicated enough that I'd give you that credit. You
Fair
didn't
enough.
mix it and do the ratios, but you know,
I could get the recipe. I should.
Yeah,
I should know it.
Like a punch, like old school. You know, like that would be you'd be mocktailing a punch anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm probably gonna snag some water later on, but that's what I'm drinking.
Oh,
what about you, Crossland?
I made a mocktail today. I had discussed doing this the last couple of times, and I did actually get a hold of the spirit that I was thinking of. I think I talked maybe a little bit about it last time, but I have tried 2 out of the 3 Mondays or Drink Mondays spiritless alcohols, and I think that both of them are great. I do prefer the gin over the whiskey that I've tried, so I decided to make one of the cocktails off their website to kind of be very similar to you, to kind of give, credence to like, is this good? Is this right? And is this tasty? So what I brought today is Monday's Gin Cucumber Collins. So how it's made, generally made with 2 ounces of Monday Zero Alcohol Gin, 3/4 ounce lime juice, 1/2 ounce simple syrup, and cucumbers muddled, dropped into the glass as well just for freshness and topped with soda water. I personally had tried this once before. I decided to do 2.5. I think it adds just a little bit more flavor as opposed to 2. So doing 2.5 ounces there. And it's great. It's really tasty. It does like actually simulate gin really well. in the way that you kind of get that botanical hit that you expect. Of course, the cucumber and lime, super fresh. It's tasty. This would be delicious outside next to the pool. Like, this is entirely throw it in a jar, go to the pool, hang out, have a good time. Definitely my favorite mocktail that I've had. And I've made a couple with this previously for my dad and whatnot. But yeah, really like that.
Awesome.
Following it up with some tea, the same Rishi tea I had last week, because I'm a monster and I have one of these every time we record. Regardless, I secretly have tea because my throat can get sore. And so I like something hot just in case that happens. So I have tea once again and water because, you know.
Because water.
All right. So with that, before we talk about the chapters, PJ, how'd you feel about this week's reading?
You know when you're on a treadmill?
Yes.
And then you've got really big feet, so you trip over yourself all the time anyway, and you do that, but you're on a treadmill, and everything just kind of starts falling out from underneath you. That's the feeling I'm getting here. I'm like, there's shit going down now, and I don't know if I'm ready for it. I wanted to be ready for it, but yeah, it's speeding up a lot.
Yeah, it's as though like you have big feet, you tripped over yourself a little bit, and because you're getting tired or what have you, whichever way you want to go with the analogy. But then at the same time, your like coach runs up next to you and is like, "Okay, we're gonna speed it up," and they put the speed up for you, and the incline. You're just like, "Oh no."
That's even worse.
I'm more likely to trip now. It does definitely have that feeling, that sensation. I totally can see that, can get that here. So, yeah, our sanderlanch has begun, my friend. I ended us in the middle of fucking combat, basically.
Yeah.
This week. So
yeah, a little bit.
Cool. Okay, before we get into the chapters, I just want to say, by the time this episode comes out, the list for Era 2, the schedule for Era 2 will be up. So if you want to check out that reading schedule, brace yourselves. We'll be done with all of Era 2 and the short stories by November 14th, by that week, because that's when The Lost Metal comes out, and we're going to go at that the week after it comes out, which means that I have approximately 4 days to read the whole book and get ready to talk about it and schedule it and do the whole thing. Have to do a very, very dense analysis and prep work in the span of 4 days, in which I usually take about 2 weeks per book. So it's going to be a lot, but it'll be a lot of fun. So get prepared. These books are Era 2 is significantly shorter, book to book as well. So don't think I think these are worth quote. They're about 1.5 books worth of text comparatively of these last 2 books. So
gotcha.
To give you comparison.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. With that, we're going to go into chapter 59. We have our logbook here. I do not know what went on in the minds of the Colossus, what memories they retained, what human emotions they truly still knew. I do know that our discovery of the one creature who named himself human was tremendously fortunate. Without his struggle to become human again, we might never have understood the link between the Colossus, hemalurgy, and the Inquisitors. Of course, there was another part for him to play. Granted, not large, but still important, all things considered.
Is that part just kind of being a friend to Vin? Or is that something that we have yet to learn?
I mean, do you think we've learned it?
No, I think it's obtuse because we haven't.
You know, I think if we're to point to anything, what's really interesting is that this part starts off with this logbook, right? Like, you talk about setting up a promise and payoff, or setting up expectations for what we're going to be reading going forward. This is our first text that we get for this part. This sets our expectations to some degree for what we're going to see, or what we might see.
Right. And then we don't address human directly at all the entire time we read this section. So,
Yep. Not even once.
No, but we do get hemalurgy in the Inquisitors and Colossus in general. So it's something.
Yeah, and it does kind of get... This one raised an interesting question for me, too. thinking about kind of colossemalurgy inquisitors and the ability to speak into minds, right? And have that control, because we know from like, well, we have an inkling. I shouldn't say we know. We have an inkling and an understanding of like Ruin's direct control or influence over people from the way that he inhabits Marsh in the earlier chapters, where we saw Marsh kind of going about his actions. I think it's really interesting, like what we're kind of left with, and it does, to the point of the Hero of Ages kind of statements, we do have questions about how all of that operates still, and to what extent, you know, their humanity is retained, or their control in general, especially when we find out that Ruin can just rip that back pretty easily later.
Instantly.
Yeah.
Without a care. But it does bring up some mechanical sort of questions that we'll get into then, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely just wanted to bring that up, though, because it feels like it ties most directly here. So,
yeah.
Ted soon arrives in Urto to find it about a third burnt to the ground, but the water has made a triumphant return, filling the canals, you know. And I think it's great that we get this little glimpse of the city here and feel this moment of victory, even if much of the populace had little to do with it. It's kind of a net benefit to everyone, of course. And I also love the brief mention that Tensoon doesn't have a master here as well. I also, just to reiterate on the population thing a little bit, I guess, some people were doing the heroic thing. I mean, we even get a little bit of that from Quellion later as we come to understand it, but it does feel like, I always feel like scenes like this are weird, because you, without actually inhabiting a bunch of different perspectives, you don't really get what anyone did, or if anyone did anything, or if they were just like superheroes saved by the water. You know what I mean? Like, there's very little perspective as far as the destruction goes.
Yeah. And I mean, Tensoon is coming in. He's been coming into all of these situations with like, oh, we experienced that a long time ago. So like, it's cool to see his perspective now, but this is a fresh take for us to see what's actually happened. Mm-hmm. So this is our first glimpse of it, which is kind of different and fun. Not fun. I don't know why I said fun, but it's different, and it is a change in the way that we're viewing things from Tensoon's perspective so far in this book, which is nice, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a great change. Great point.
Yeah, the no master line, like you alluded to, and like Tensoon directly made note of, I thought was an incredibly powerful comment, and even to more of an extent than what he actually like alluded to. Just it seemed kind of cathartic for him, the way that he describes that, like, nobody could ever understand what he meant by this, and that he's the first in 700 years to be out of the homeland without being on assignment. Like, that is, just saying it out loud seems freeing, doesn't it? In a couple of different ways. I think mentioning it out loud and saying I'm free, you know, I mean, Ruin did it, right? Like, Ruin screamed as he came out of the well too. But there is, I think, something to him admitting, you know, both that he's the only he's the most powerful conjurer ever, in theory, you know, or the most powerful conjurer alive right now. Additionally, he's without a master. He's without kind of the usual binds of the contract to some degree, in the way that he's not exactly treating it as a faithful document. I mean, I guess he's operating in the way that he thinks the contract. He's becoming more of an interpretive, like, reader of the contract too. So there's so many different things that are going on for Tensoon, that his reality has shifted, or that he's shifted his reality, that I love it. I think that, like you said, this is kind of a culmination point to some degree for that. Yeah, I'd agree with you.
Yeah. It all kind of comes to a head as he enters the city. So Tensoon, though, runs into Breeze and some familiar faces, and we're just starting to see the beginning of the unwinding to some degree of Tensoon's lie about being Orsor, as everyone else assumed he had been up until this point. And instead of referring, like, I think Breeze makes a joke about him being Lord Renew, and instead what we get is, like, he refers to him throughout the episode as little doggy, or like as the doggy, which is, I think, meant to be derogatory in addition to kind of like poking fun, because Breeze doesn't know how far he can trust this Khandra that he doesn't know versus the one that he did know. I think there's a certain element there.
I agree with you, but at the same time, I don't understand it. I don't understand why that would be the case, because clearly they suddenly just innately trust him enough to like reveal Vin's location and like give him all of this intel that they've been collecting and stuff like that. Like that to me felt one of the most unearned sort of instances of trust throughout this entire story. And like we get the perspective of like, yes, this is the same person, but I have no idea why we would think that Breeze would just jump on board with that trust as well. You know? Does that make sense? Am I tracking?
Yeah. No, it does. It does. And I think that's where I prefer like Sazed's opinion on like, well, it makes sense for a lot of reasons. I mean, obviously at the right hand was in the room when all these things were going on. Like I know this Khandra because of that. But for Breeze, I think it makes more sense for him to have been maybe more skeptical on the whole until Sazed speaks up.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of my thought, if that makes sense.
It's fair.
Like Breeze is more skeptical, but then once Sazed steps in, it starts to become a little bit more even. And I think that's where it goes from like kind of a jovial accusation to call him doggy into something that's a little bit more playful near the end of their interactions in the next chapter.
Mm-hmm.
But
okay,
if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I mean, of course, like Sazed doesn't fully trust here even entirely, or isn't like, it's not even, it is kind of, he doesn't really fully trust here. He trusts more after the reveal and the discussions of Terra's religion that we'll talk about in a second.
Mm-hmm.
Or rather in the next chapter.
Yeah.
Or not the next chapter, but in a couple of chapters, whatever, you know. So the chapter ends with conversations between Sazed and Tensoon, as we've been discussing, and man, it's short. We find out that Spook is still alive. Of course, this entire chapter is short. There's a lot of kind of short, jumpy chapters here, so we'll be saying that a lot, I'm sure. But we also get hints of what's to come from Tensoon, the end of the world. And Sazed doesn't even flinch at that idea, which freaks out Tensoon a little bit.
Yeah, he says something along the lines of, I'll never understand humans. And no, I think you'll just never understand our sad boy anomaly here. I think you're dealing with a broken example. And yeah. But you're right. Sazed's just not receptive to that proclamation.
I mean, it's not even that he's not receptive. It's like he's a fucking wall, and it just doesn't matter. Like he's not even paying attention.
No.
At this point, like nothing's. He needs to be like grabbed and like shaken, but that's not going to happen by the dog because the dog doesn't have thumbs.
But he does. He's able to like stuff his stick and bindle. Remember?
Again, I think the stick and bindle became one with the spine. I think it went into him.
Right, but it says that he grows his paws to be more dexterous.
Yeah, so he can get overtrained.
So he can grab stuff.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I agree. I just also like the idea of like he can't shake him because he's like, I am dog. Mm-hmm. No, but I get you for sure. All right, with that, we go into our next chapter here, chapter 60. This one, I think, up until this point, is one of my favorite chapters in the entire book. So lots to talk about here, but we start off with the logbook. Of course, the prison Preservation created for Ruin was not created out of Preservation's power, though it was of Preservation. Rather, Preservation sacrificed his consciousness, one could say his mind, to fabricate that prison. He left a shadow of himself. But Ruin, once escaped, began to suffocate and isolate the small remnant vestige of his rival. I wonder if Ruin ever thought it strange that Preservation had cut himself off from his own power, relinquishing it and leaving it in the world to be gathered and used by men. In Preservation's gambit, I see nobility, cleverness, and desperation. He knew that he could not defeat Ruin. He had given too much of himself, and beyond that, he was the embodiment of stasis and stability. He could not destroy, not even to protect. It was against his nature. Hence, the prison. Mankind, however, had been created by both Ruin and Preservation, with a hint of Preservation's own soul to give them sentience and honor. In order for the world to survive, Preservation knew he had to depend upon his creations, to give them his trust. I wonder what he thought when those creations repeatedly failed him.
Yeah, man. Like, just think about this from the perspective of the author of this logbook. Like, we're dealing with somebody who understands the width of this, like, centuries-long war waged between gods. It is an amazing perspective to be inhabiting.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really enjoy this. But clever to basically diffuse your own power into something that could use it effectively as opposed to using it yourself. Like, that's kind of the idea, right?
Yeah, I mean, effectively, are you suggesting which bit? Are you talking about the well that was created at the prison?
Preservation,
or are you talking about
giving
the people?
The people.
Okay.
Humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going somewhere with that. Don't remember where.
Yeah. Giving away some of that power. It's makes for an interesting... I mean, obviously, it makes the humans compelling, and it's what makes them human, right? You know, human, ska, terrorismen, all of them. It's what makes them who they are.
And it also,
to a large extent,
makes that conversation between Elend and Preservation make a lot more sense as far as, can we defeat him? Being kind of the, I don't know, maybe. Because that's this gambit that they were talking about.
Oh, you said gambit.
No, he said gambit.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
The text said gambit. I'm allowed to say it.
I know. I'm just kidding. I mean, I gotta make fun of you for it though, while I can, because now that you've said it once, I'm going to say it 7 times inside of this episode. But yeah, I agree with you. I think what makes this so interesting is that as we've gone through the logbook, we've learned more and more that this person writing the logbook knows so much that we don't. And I don't mean that in like a way that the logbooks are like, oh, there's so much there, but it's been gradually showing. I think if you went back and read the old logbooks and imparted this understanding of the deep knowledge and comprehension that whoever this is has of these topics, rereading those, there's a lot more subtext. Like, there's a lot more hints there, I think, than you would anticipate, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I believe it. Totally.
But I think that it's really incredible how that just unfolds so naturally as we see the kind of writing grow from this author. Cool. We move to Vin, still trapped in her cell with the Haze Killers of Fadrix. She's unable to find any potential means of escape, even trying to break free and getting absolutely demolished, despite putting up a decent fight and being as tricky as you might expect with those silver screws from her bed frame. Yeoman reacts, predicting her move while burning ATM, and slams her into the ground, however. What'd you make of the man doing the thing?
I mean, pretty fucking sweet. Pretty fucking sweet. And I think we've had instances previously where he was clearly burning ATM. But this is the first time we get the idea that it's probably the only metal that he can burn. And that gets further confirmed later. But yeah, this was a nice reveal that he's an ATM misting, which is something that I had forgotten they had explicitly said couldn't be a thing. I just assumed it'd be too rare to learn whether or not you were a misting.
Too rare to test, right? Like too expensive to test too. Like ATM was a valuable commodity. So it didn't make sense to, not, or to even test that. Like, why would you?
I mean, but it'd be like eating a diamond. You can just wait to poop it out and then you can get it back.
Yep. You still got to clean out the poop, though.
I mean, for something worth thousands of dollars.
Right.
And is like the cornerstone of the economy.
I will say that the only confirmation we get that it seems to be the only metal he burns is his own word.
Don't we get more confirmation later, though?
I think he says it, and Vin does a lot of assessing to believe that that's the case, because she notices that she wasn't slammed into the ground with pewter, and there's some small things where she's like, I don't think he's a full Mistborn, and he goes so far as to say it. The question is, how far can we believe him? But I think his point too is that he's been nothing but truthful this whole time, which is what happens inside of the trial, right? Ruin appears in the room, circling around and pacing, talking to Vin, and we proceed to get one of, I think, the most elegantly executed conversations in the entire novel. They begin to talk about Vin's intent and Ellen as a man seeking the cash and what's inside. What do you make of the reaction to both the assertion of Ellen's sincerity and Yeoman's commentary about the cash, honesty, and kind of everything else that's gone around here in this circle?
I think I completely agree with you. This conversation is clean. Like, it's just so snappy, so cleanly written, and elegant is the perfect way to describe it. Yeoman, to this point, has proven himself to be a wonderfully complex adversary. His rebuttals and mistrust in all of the answers that Vin gives is understandable and realistic, and it really creates this dynamic, fun argument scene. And like, it's just enjoyable to take in every sense of the word. Rereading this more and more times, it almost got to the point where he didn't actually confirm the existence of the ATM cache. He does right at the end, not directly, but implies it. But like, I was going through it this last read through, given that like what happens later on with Ruin, he very nearly doesn't actually confirm the existence of the cache. And that's the one point where he's like not being truthful, but he almost stays entirely truthful. And let me find where exactly that is. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Are you talking?
Oh, yeah. It's the last paragraph of chapter 60. Those lumps of metal do me no good, save perhaps to keep you in check. That's the only thing that he says that technically acknowledges the existence of the ATM cache, which would be the lie.
Yeah, I think that's totally the point, is that he hasn't, like, he's not really claiming to have the cache or to have the ATM. And that's, I think that's one of the very subtle things that Brandon does here, is he's able to weave around that very easily without saying it, because it's like, he didn't really say it, it's implied. And Ruin is literally so desperate that he is looking for any implication of where it could be.
Right. Yeah. Super well done.
Yeah. I mean, it just derailed us for like 10 minutes. So, and I think that makes for a really interesting point. I think next up is one of the most kind of elegant debates inside the whole series, at least for me, the conversation that happens between Yeoman and Vin surrounding religion. This feels like kind of an assertion of the theme of this book. Yeoman is stretching what he believes to be real, trying to make it fit the current circumstances, because he's getting kind of secondhand information and dealing with it. Yeoman really listens. And I think that's absolutely massive here, even if he doesn't take a response fully in good faith. But there's just a lot here that I think has a lot of direct connotation that I think is really elegantly put from Brandon.
And it's a little bit ham-fisted in the in this one very particular point, in that it talks about how it's unbelievable that anyone could believe in an unseen, unfelt God. But I think it's kind of important to have that note there to realize how much of a grasp the Lord Ruler has had, since he's influenced the entirety of faith for the last 1,000 years, not only directly, but indirectly by like kind of shunning all of the other ones and killing everybody that, or like just killing off all the other religions directly and indirectly. So yeah, a fair bit of world building still happening here, but it was a little unsubtle, you know?
Yeah, it's unsubtle because the Lord Ruler is real and physical, right? I think what's so fascinating is, as we think about Sazed, is that all of those are the ones that are really missing the connection, that are believing in baseless gods, and that it's so easy. I think what's so interesting about Yeoman is it's so easy to believe something when it's directly presented to you versus something that's distant, especially when we talk about the fact that we have Ruin and Preservation, right, that are like literally gods, but they were unseen for so long. And matter of fact, Yeoman still hasn't seen either of them really physically manifest in any way, shape, or form.
Right. But at the same time, you could argue that Yeoman's faith in the Lord Ruler right now is based on an unseen, unfelt God.
Yeah, but that's not really the way that the religion works. Like the religion is worshiping him.
Yes, it's worshiping him, but also he's attributing things like, I know the Lord Ruler has a plan for me at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not the case.
Oh, sure.
But he's filling that void.
Okay.
This unfounded faith in the Lord Ruler.
Yeah. But he only has that to begin with because he existed physically. You know what I mean? Like that's where I think that ramification is very interesting. And like you said, yeah, like an unseen God, that does become a little bit direct. But I don't feel like it's ham-fisted on the whole because of the way that it assesses the idea of these two powers, right, on the planet, and how, there was a religion that believed and worshipped them, and like all of these different concepts that kind of circle around in this conversation that I think are really great, to kind of have these two distinct sides to conversation. It almost feels like Elend should be in this scene, or like Sazed should be in this scene, because that would be the right person to argue. But at the same time, I feel like Vin is likely also a great person to have in this scene because her entire arc has been faith and trust. So
that's true. Does Kelsier come up in this point? The Church of the Survivor?
This is the conversation shortly hereafter where Yeoman points to her and says, "You're the heir of the survivor," right? And that does come up in this conversation, yeah.
Okay. Lots of religions bouncing around.
Yeah. And to that point, like Vin has a really important realization. Elend isn't the new Lord Ruler and never has been. She's been the one subjugating kings since the Well of Ascension. She's been the one who picked up the power. She's not Kelsier's heir. She's not the heir to the survivor. She's the Lord Ruler's. And that is a large reason that Yeoman's had to keep her alive, to work out this problem, this little issue with his own faith about whether or not this is real.
I feel like this is something that I would have latched onto and like asserted from the beginning and have been wrong about. But frankly, like this never even crossed my mind, especially considering Tensoon's predictions early on, or not predictions, proclamations earlier on about Vin being the mother in a way that was entirely like not fully explained. And I remember like questioning that, like, where did that come from? And still never really made any forward thoughts on that.
Wait, the mother thing come from?
Yeah.
I think the mother thing was much better founded than you're giving it credit for.
His entire reason was because she killed him.
Yeah. She fills the position. She has the ability to command them.
Yeah.
Like the Allomancers of old. I think that's the specific thing, like in combination, that he cites that I think makes sense.
Fair. I don't think he makes that argument with them, though. That's just kind of in his own head.
No, because I think he gets cut off. So I don't think he gets to fully make it, and he's silenced. And then he does get to make a big, impassioned argument, but ultimately is judged, that it doesn't fucking matter anyway. So
true.
Yeah. I really love this sort of realization, because I think it's really... It circles back on the thing that we've been talking about with Elend too, where it's like, oh, you're not the king you should be. You're not behaving according to, kind of the standard that you set for yourself. And yeah, I mean, he's kind of had his hand forced by his equivalent of the Lord Ruler, by the Empress, right? Like, she often is pushing the envelope in very different directions than where he would push. But they've got a tug, a give and a take on their relationship on the whole. So it feels like, I mean, maybe the Lord Ruler just needed a girlfriend.
Probably. He needed someone. He needed something to...
Something. Literally anything. Lord Rulers will literally not go to therapy instead of dating someone to save 1,000 years of people in torture. No, I just really appreciate this revelation in this moment, and being able to finally sit back and go, no, it's not Elend. It never has really been Elend that's been in that position. It's always been Vin, because she's been the maniacal one. He's just been the one holding the reins on armies, more or less.
Yeah.
In political structures, I guess. But he's like a figurehead. She's the knife. So,
they can both be the Lord Ruler together.
Lord Rulers holding hands forever and ever and ever.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. So we already talked about kind of the way this chapter ends, which is Yeoman's comments on the cache and the ATM on the whole. But any other thoughts there?
It really does make you think, like, why there would be a stockpile if its entire use, if this whole plan was kind of predicted as a contingency by the Lord Ruler, what would be the point of the ATM because of how it's been utilized so far? You know?
Yeah.
Brings that into question. Really kind of ratchets up the intensity of why.
Yeah, why ATM? And it also, like, to your point of if it was there, like, as Yeoman says, it's fucking useless, mostly. Like, it's no longer the fuel or the backbone of the Empire. So,
right.
Yeah. Cool. All right. With that, we go into chapter 61. We've got our logbook to start off. I don't wonder that we focused far too much on the mists during those days. But from what I now know of sunlight and plant development, I realize that our crops weren't in as much danger from the misty days as we feared. We might very well have been able to find plants to eat that did not need as much light to survive. True, the mists did also cause some deaths in those who went out in them, but the number killed was not a large enough percentage of the population to be a threat to our survival as a species. The ash, that was our real problem. The smoke filling the atmosphere, the black flakes covering up everything beneath, the eruptions of the volcanic ash mounts, those were what would kill the world.
Understandably, because those were put in place to cool the world down more, right? Like that was the idea, was Rashik fucked up and pushed the Earth too close to the sun, the planet too close to the sun, and needed to kind of blot out the sun to a certain extent so it cooled down the surface. And if Ruin is making the ash mounts erupt more, that's just going to usher in an ice age to a certain extent, much like how them dinos got killed.
Right. Yeah. I think the other part here is that our author points directly to the mists, right? And is like, we were a little bit too worried about the mists for a while. Like we were fixated on the wrong thing.
It does say, like, yeah, it killed people, but you know, it was fine. It was just a few of them.
Just a little bit of killing. Just a little bit. Totally. So this is a lightning fast chapter. In the audiobook, it is 7 minutes long. It is very easy to forget that this chapter exists, but it happens. It's important. Like I said, we jump back and forth between perspectives a lot. This is really just a clock in with Elend before we get to him later, just to make sure we know kind of exactly where he is. So we hop over to Elend and his kind of triumphant return. And I put triumphant in quotes because it's not triumphant. He just got out of a kind of a bad time. He, avoided killing himself, which is good, letting himself be smothered in ash, but returns with, kind of his new bastion of Kolos and the information that he gained from preservation. What do you think of Elend's decision to take Fadrix despite preservation's warning against it? Does it feel like a little bit of ruin and humanity that the logbook mentions to you here, or like what do you think?
It does to a certain extent, but at the same time, we're kind of blessed with this full scope of the weight of what preservation said to him, whereas he's still kind of struggling with understanding and interpreting. I don't know if I'd put it entirely as a conscious decision to go against what preservation said to attack, as opposed to just, I don't know what to make of this, and I'm not going to change the entire plans of my army based on the furious jumpings of a Mistman.
Mistman.
That was kind of my take on it, because he is still kind of struggling with understanding what was actually being said throughout this section. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that it's a fascinating little bit here. It's so hard for him to take the step, like, to even try to parse what was going on with preservation. Like, if you think about what's happening, you had a supernatural ghost like wave a bunch at you and like confirm or deny things. Like, how do you take that on face? Do you take that on face value? Is any of that true? Is any of that real?
Especially
like, to what extent?
When you were basically ready to give up. You were ready to just let the ash smother you. You're delirious. You're tired. How much of that actually happened?
Right. And the thing that I would tag in there that I really think about the most is like with Elend in particular, I think his biggest takeaway is that someone else gave him the hope to believe that there was a chance to win here. You know what I mean? Like, there's a chance to make it away. Okay, cool. I'll carry on because someone else gave me hope at the right moment. More than anything else. I think everything else could be chalked up to, like, I think it's great for us because we can kind of try to interpret things. But to your point, Elend's exhaustion, like, yeah. We also get a little note here that I forgot to create a little note on about General, was the general from last book that was Straff's general of whom he was afraid of usurping him, who was sent back to take control of Urto, and obviously is no longer in control since Quellion took over. But it gives us this kind of perspective that, you know, General seems to have completely gone away and his retinue is completely vanished and everything else. Like, he's just gone because of the chaos of everything.
Yep.
It's like a threat from the last book. Just poof.
I
don't know, man.
Motherfuckers be turning to mist. Disappearing.
I don't know that he was turned into mist or anything, but yeah.
No.
Yeah. It's a fun little bit that I just remembered when I was like double checking something inside of the text, and I was like, oh yeah, General, that guy. So yeah. Okay. With that, quick chapter 61, breezy, easy breezy, beautiful cover girl. We go into chapter 62. We start off with our logbook. I suspected that Alendi, the man Rashik killed, was himself a misting, a seeker. Allomancy, however, was a very different thing in those days, and much more rare. The Allomancers alive in our day are the descendants of men who ate those few beads of preservation's power. They formed the foundation of nobility, and were the first to name him emperor. The power in these few beads was so concentrated that it could last through 10 centuries of breeding and inheritance.
So this is the first instance of mentioning allomancy existing before the Ascension.
Mm-hmm.
All it does is make me want to dig in more of a Silmarillion-esque compendium to this story. Like, I want to know, what does that look like? What does that mean? What the fuck? I thought it started with our boy Rashik and with preservation and with, I don't know what the fuck else. Like, is this on a cycle? Is that like the weak endings of these generations of allomancy that's starting to finally kind of peter out before being restarted here? Does this happen every 1,000 years? And like we just caught the tail end, and there's just a couple like weak sauce allomancers left, and suddenly there's more nuggies.
Question. Yeah, I was going to say it does beg the question of like, could there be more nuggies? Because like the well cycles, like does the rest of the power cycle, like how does that work?
Mm-hmm.
And then again, to that same degree, like there's a question about like, if Alendi was a seeker, was he potentially a very weak seeker because it had been bred out at that point? He was a weaker. Nice. But like if it could have been bred out at that point, or like bred down, you know? And so it's almost not relevant because you just don't understand, you know, to what degree you even have power. So yeah, it's fascinating. I agree with you. A compendium would be interesting.
Does one exist?
Be fun. Closest you get is a 17th shard.
Gotcha.
So I have a feeling we'll probably get something at some point that'll be very documentative and explanatory in a similar way to like an encyclopedia or a world building thing. Brandon has one internally that the company uses that he writes and like adjusts, of course, but that's not externally available, of course. And there's also a like lore keeper that he has hired to help him keep shit straight and like rules and stuff straight as is necessary with something giant and sprawling. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you know, I think it exists. I think we'll get it at some point, but it is not currently published.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. He's got Inside of the Cosmere, another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. At least, I think it's at least 17 more books that he wanted to write. 5 in the Stormlight Archive. Well, 6, including the one that's coming out. 7 Mistborn, 3 and then 4, or 4 and then 3, 3 and then 4, something like that. 3 in Dragonsteel, 2 Elantris sequels. Yeah, that sounds right. Anyway, blarp.
That's
lots of books, man.
Of books.
Yeah, it's a stupid amount of books. And that's not including the 4 books that you purchased for next year as well. Yeah. He just wrote those as bonus stories because he didn't have to travel during COVID. And he was like, oh, I would like to not travel as much anymore so I could write more. This seems like a legit thing to do going forward. So he's basically put all of that time and effort into his YouTube. Anyway, moving on. We start this chapter standing over Spook's bed, contemplating what happened to the survivor of the flames, and also shows that Sazed hasn't fully connected the dots yet on hemalurgy, I think. Quellion also has completely reverted to his old self, looking to help people, shifting dramatically since it was pulled out as well. Spook ultimately, got what he wanted and brought what he wanted to the city. He gave them hope.
Maybe it's stupid. I kind of like that we get Sazed's perspective of like not having this connecting the dots this late in the book. Since we've understood hemalurgy for so long, it's easy to like get away from like what is the actual understanding that these characters have. And like I get to feel intelligently superior to the smart guy, Like it's simultaneously grounding and also, I don't know, smug. It's fun. But at the same time, this is the point where Spook hasn't woken up, right?
No, Spook has not woken up yet. That's in the short chapter that comes later. I think maybe 64. Right.
Yeah. Yep. So I've got thoughts on that then. But yeah,
okay.
I appreciated that we got Sazed sort of not making that connection for the same reason a few of the other like perspective things we've talked about in the previous couple sections have been, in that like it's just grounding to remember exactly what's known by these characters, because we get a lot of external information in this book.
Yeah, there's a lot of external information in the form of these logbook sections. So it's important that we get these refreshers to be like, oh, okay, he doesn't get that. I think the other thing that it speaks to too is, I mean, beyond the fact that there's a possibility that he just doesn't understand it straight up, which is very likely, he's also just too distracted to even question some of these things or shared similarities. I feel like a Sazed in his right mind probably would have asked or gone to Quellion to ask him things and questions about, his change in mood and appearance and everything else. But that's not the case because Sazed is very stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So Sazed makes the move in this chapter to finish debunking his portfolio in a big way, I think, to get unstuck. And that really tears into these last 10 religions, trying to give them their fair shake and their fair due. He gets through them, feels numb. He feels each of their fallacies as very distinct, their defamations of other faiths and their own as the true faith, fully contradictory, and it deeply, deeply pains him. Little quote here. A barb-covered wire twisting around his chest combined with an absolute inability to do anything about it. He felt like huddling in a corner, crying, and just letting himself die.
Man, I can feel that. What an incredible description of pain, of like emotional pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's short, sweet, but one of the best descriptors I've ever read.
Yeah, I totally agree. Could not agree more. I think that it's really poignant. It points to one of a small thing that I want to talk about. Fantasy books are often trapped a little bit because colloquialisms that we would say, or like even objects that we know of, don't exist. And so like a barb-covered wire twisting around versus barbed wire twisting around. Like, you know what I mean? It's simple things like that make fantasy writing, I think, a little bit more difficult because you have to think of something, you have to draw from things that are in context, in world, in universe, versus something like Red Rising. We could even explain away certain things because it's like, well, it happened in a post 2022 Earth. So it's like, it's there, it's present. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it explicitly calls itself out as like our universe, you know, like it makes references to modern day pop culture things. But yeah, much more complicated when you're dealing with a distinct universe that's outside of our pop culture and invention realm.
Yeah, right. Which is, it just puts us in a very unique spot. And that's super, super disconnected from like the rest of this text, but it is just something to bring up, is that I think often, you know, something like that is overlooked inside of the conventions of fantasy. So,
right.
And man, just after that, he finds some of the documents that he and Tyndall had worked on together. He confronts himself on this lie that he's been telling himself, that he doesn't care anymore. And I think that this is a huge deal, that this whole pursuit for him has been chasing his care. It's a betrayal of the things that he understands the most deeply, and that's where this pain originates from. To quote again here, if he believed, it meant that God or the universe or whatever it was that watched over man had failed. Better to believe that there was nothing at all. Then all of the world's inadequacies were simply mere chance.
How fucking ironic. Immediately after, or a couple chapters after seeing the death of preservation, we get this musing from Sazed. I mean, do you think that was intentionally calling that out, or do you think it was just kind of topical for Sazed?
I think it's topical. I think that there is some irony because we know that Preservation died. Again, this would be dramatic irony because we know that Preservation died. He has no idea. So there is that. But I think that this stretches because Sazed doesn't believe in the religion of ruin and preservation. I think we could firmly say that he...
That's a good question. That's a good point. Did he ever explicitly like knock this one off the list?
No, because he couldn't find it because it's the terrorist faith. Which is why that's the big deal with Tensoon in a second, right? So like he could never knock it off the list because it's the terrorist faith that's been hidden for so long, and so there's just this sort of deep irony and moment, and I just saw PJ's eyes light up as he connected all of the dots here in this section. But I think that it's still a great little commentary because obviously we know that this world isn't set up by mere chance. None of it is, even though it might feel random and abusive and mean to our characters at different times. It's obviously all very set
but it's
up
on
with strict
purpose.
rules. Yes, on purpose. Kill your darlings, as Stephen King would say. So yeah, it's a great little section. But I think it also touches on kind of a big world thing with the questions surrounding faith, kind of at large ad nauseum, which is that some people have firm beliefs that like faith exists, and then others have the universe is a mere random consequence of different actions at different times, and it's stating a position on predeterminism or like a determined origin point. It's an interesting concept to like tuck into this book too, that I think speaks more to Brandon at the time and how he's writing and thinking than a lot of the other stuff has. This feels very poignant in particular as far as phrasing and phraseology goes.
Right.
So, yeah. This is kind of Sazed's character climax, though, Like, this is a big deal here throughout this chapter. This is, in a big way, a lot of different moments for him, especially as we go in, flipping through the book. We find that flower of mares that was given to her by Kelsier, and our boy, Sazed, is broken. But he sees this distant hope of faith in that flower and doesn't understand why he's been kind of left without it or why he's bereft of it at this point.
I feel like we could make some really interesting conversation surrounding that flower and the hope that it inspired. And now, given our understanding of how, like through the logbooks, how this all came to be and why the plants change colors and everything, could this be seen entirely as a lesson in futility? Like the idea was to go try to restore the earth to the point where we get these green plants again. And short of going back and moving the planet again, that's not going to happen. Or is it pointing to the fact that somebody could move the planet again, and this should be hope above everything else? Like, I don't know what to make of it.
I think it's more the latter, but I think that it is a take it as you will kind of reading. I think you could really look at it either way. But I think in general, it's this idea of hope, of seeing that dream fulfilled, right? I think that's what Kelsier says, is like, I had decided to see her dream fulfilled, if I remember correctly, and to like see the plants return. So I feel like it's meant to be a kind of a larger symbol of hope that change could happen, because that's what it was for Kelsier, or that's what it was for Mare in the very beginning. Then that's what it was for Kelsier, and then that's what it was for Spook, and now that's what it is for Sazed. Like, the way that this hands down as it goes from hand to hand to hand, I think is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, I think it's the latter. I think it's hopeful. I think it's, you know, a little bit here, but I really appreciate that it's here inside of this little section. So cool. We then move to Tensoon, Breeze, and Sazed talking about finding Vin. Tensoon calls Sazed the announcer before he begins to pad off to head for his homeworld, or homeland, his home world, before he heads off to the homeland, right? But that triggers a memory in Sazed, and he jumps into action, finding the text that Quan had written, that he'd transcribed from the rubbing that had been manipulated. And there's this question of how our dear old doggy knows, and our good boy says, "It strikes me as odd, Terraceman, that there's one great inconsistency in this all, a problem no one has ever thought to point out. What happened to the packmen who traveled with Rashik and Alendi up to the Well of Ascension? And we put together a big piece of this puzzle. Those initial packmen became the first generation of Khandra. The Mistrates are a creation of the Lord Ruler as well. And, in turn, the Terrace religion potentially lives with the first generation of the Khandra."
So, holy fuck. First of all, I guess the first generation does still exist.
Yeah.
That said, in my mind, I had believed this so entirely that I assumed it was just textual, and that's how it was. But I made it up. I'm pretty sure. I thought they all died on the journey back. Like, I thought all of the packmen died, and the Lord Ruler was the sole survivor of the journey. Was there anything that said that?
No, I think the lie that everyone was tricked by was that they were turned into nobility.
I didn't even...
Because they were the first Allomancers, because they were subservient. They were his people.
Yeah, I knew that, but just in my head, that wasn't even the... In my head, that wasn't even the companions. That was just like his friends.
Which were these? Okay, yeah, sure.
Like, yeah, genuinely, in my mind, everybody had died. Like, they were on the fucking... on Everest, and there were just bodies of frozen people in the wake of Alendi.
Oh, they lost a lot of people on the way up.
Yeah, so that was, for whatever reason, like, I didn't even buy into the lie, because I had just assumed everybody died. And he just, like, yeah, these are my crew. They're getting allomancy. Let's go. So yeah, this was a double fun realization that I was just wrong the whole time. But this does bring up, for me, a question that I feel like I've asked in the past and never really got a straight answer on, or I forgot. Maybe I got a straight answer and I forgot, which is entirely believable knowing me. Why was Ruin able to change the metal mines, the copper mines? Like the copy of everything, like the copy of Alendi's logbook, all of it was able to be edited on the copper mine as well. Does that have something to do with the fact that it can also be degraded? So it's not like actually imprinted on the metal?
So that's not a degradation, right? So Alendi's logbook was not written in metal. It was written on paper. And so we find that in a journal.
That's what I'm talking about. How even Sazed's copper mined copies of what was being written and being edited was also being edited on that.
Yeah, that was Quan's, right?
So that's what I meant. Sorry,
yep.
That's what I meant.
Not Alendi's. I just want to clarify. So Alendi's was paper to begin with. It was manipulated from the beginning to kind of lead us in the direction that it wanted us to. And then the important thing with this isn't that metal mines themselves can be manipulated. It's that when you have to take the memory out and then write it down, because that's what the keepers do specifically, that's when it's vulnerable. It's not the metal mine being vulnerable. It's the text after you've taken it out of your mind to write it down.
Okay.
because that's what they do specifically anytime they access one of those things.
Gotcha. I was thinking, so he has to write it down in order to access it?
No, but he does because he wants to put it away so that it doesn't degrade. That way he has longer term access to it.
Gotcha.
This was explained near the end of the Well of Ascension in a lot of detail, but
I thought there was a point where he was going through and like opening up his metal mind and referencing.
Because you take it out and it's fully out in your brain, and then you write it down and then you put it back. So like whatever he's writing and transcribing, he might be reading it again and then flushing that shit back, and that's what's messing it up.
Gotcha. Okay.
So cool. It's opening up that to the corruption. The metal mind itself is not accessible.
Gotcha. Pew.
Yeah. But it's fascinating. It leads to a really interesting, place.
It does. And it is.
Yeah. But this reveal is the one that got me the first time, for sure. Like, this is the one that I just like almost punched myself in the face. I was like, you dumbass. You weren't paying attention to that. And because I also don't think I had figured out the earring quite yet at this juncture. No, I had. Never mind. You figured that out when like Ruin's wandering around. You know that it's you assume it's the earring. Like, you can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But this was a big one. This was like a big one where I went, of course. And of course they would be old, and they would be weird, and they would be like, duh. And of course the Lord Ruler wouldn't want other terroristmen to have the power of Feruchemy, duh. Because like then that prevents them from like, if they had the power of Allomancy, they could compound and live forever like he could. There are all of these different things that just make sense. It does make for an interesting question about the Mistwraiths though. Like, those were the ones that didn't choose to, or like how or where did all of the rest of those Mistwraiths come from? It's kind of a fun question.
That is a fun question. It's also a terrifying question, and I don't want to know.
I mean, fair point. So that, of course, leads us to our final note in the chapter, which is where Sazed leaves that of the Terrace faith, the faith that he saw for this entire series, not being dead because he can go to the first generation. Like I mentioned in the last little bit, but that's where the chapter itself ends.
Yeah, I'm excited to find out. Do you think they're going to? No, I don't.
Well,
I mean, you think
run your mouth. That was aggressive. I'm sorry.
I feel like there's going to be something problematic with just giving information to Sazed, because otherwise they would have maybe done more to share. But they're old and weird, and like you mentioned,
what do you mean problematic?
I guess they're not just going to be, Sazed's not going to show up and they'll be like, oh yeah, sure, let's share all the information that we've got. Like, there's going to be a problem there.
Right. Not only will there be, I think, a problem there, as you can imagine it, but like Tensoon didn't leave on good fucking terms.
No, Tensoon absconded.
Yeah, literally. Just ran away. Yeah, so I just, it's just another small thing. Oh, man. Okay, so we get to chapter 63 in the logbook. Yeah. Rune tried many times to get spikes into other members of the crew. Though some of what happened makes it seem like it was easy for him to gain control of people, it really was not. Sticking the metal in just the right place at the right time was incredibly difficult, even for a subtle creature like Rune. For instance, he tried very hard to spike both Elend and Yeoman. Elend managed to avoid it, and each time, as he did on the field outside the small city that contained the next to last storage cache. Rune actually did manage to get a spike into Yeoman once. Yeoman, however, removed the spike before Rune got a firm grip on him. It was much easier for Rune to get a hold on people who were passionate and impulsive than it was for him to get a hold on people who were logical and prone to working through their actions in their minds.
So I'm guessing that instance with Yeoman was before the one with Penrod, because he learned like, shit, they're just going to take it out. So he's got to like build in a reason for it to not get just removed by somebody super logical. Most people who would say, no, I don't want this stake in my heart. Please take it out of my body.
Which is why he puts it in the heart, to...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that was learned after the failed attempt on Yeoman. That's my guess.
I think that tracks. I think that makes perfect sense in terms of his behavior. So, yeah, totally.
I do like just imagining a very sneaky Ruin just obsessed with stabbing people. Shit.
Fuck. Missed another one. Yeah. That'd be kind of a fun little side journey for everyone to go on. Yeah. So we go back to Vin, and she's trying to interrogate the why out of Ruin, but he's fully ignoring her at this point. They swing back to the Lord Ruler, which I think is interesting for the record. He's ignoring her because he's not there. He's with Marsh, right? Like he's got to be away, less focused. He can be a little bit more general, but he's still kind of within the realm because Marsh is getting closer at this point. So they swing back to the Lord Ruler chatting about him and his legacy. I find it interesting, the concept of the Lord Ruler rejecting Ruin, and it shows that he was really a man of preservation much more than he was of Ruin. I find it fascinating that Ruin specifically says that he is a tool for change, because in a big way, he's right. You know, like that's kind of his whole deal.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's even more than in a big way. I think it's entirely just he's right. That is his nature. That is the entire point of his being. And as evidenced by the fact that when he was locked away, nothing changed. So it brings some more tangible proof to the idea that nothing can change without Ruin.
Yeah, right. It's very much, I mean, he is in many ways entropy, but not entirely. Like he is all things change, even if you're like talking about a small thing of Ruin, like that's important because it's a small change that could be made versus sort of stability perpetually. So we go to Vin hailing the guards to talk to Yeoman and exchanging information. She knows that she's willing to give it freely and does so in an attempt to show that she has nothing to hide. She wants to save these people, and she claims that she was intentionally led here, and specifically to Yeoman tugging on his faith, you know, with the Lord Ruler saying that I needed to be here. Like I was led to you specifically. I really appreciate how she's using this information that Ruin is giving her to personify the fact that she's this replacement of the Lord Ruler in his mind, and kind of manipulating and pulling on that heartstring as much as possible throughout the scene.
Yeah. I'm hitting conspiracy theory brain a little bit again.
Okay.
Like as I'm one to do, wondering how much of this is also just directly Ruin's influence in a small way, planting that seed in her. And that's kind of where I'd like to bring up I know we just had this conversation about Tensoon and heralding her as the mother because she killed the Lord Ruler and took his place. Like, could that be not quite as founded as he seems to make it, and is a manipulation by Ruin because he is a creature of Ruin, therefore probably entirely able to be fully controlled by Ruin, perpetuating that story? I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with it, but it feels like another twist that could be made.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe that is, I mean, the thing with Ruin and with thinking about Tensoon in particular is we know that the spikes are there, and like the spikes are specifically of Ruin. And while we do have an understanding that they're almost seemingly very weak spikes comparatively, we don't know to what extent. What does that mean for the power and influence of Ruin? Yeah. So is Vin's. Vin's is weak as well. So, yeah, it leads to some interesting places for sure. Vin talks about like the ground, and like earlier on in the chapter talks about a lot of different components here with Ruin in the conversation that we were kind of talking about a little bit earlier. She almost like ascertains this idea, or like points to this idea that he might be a person, like an actual person. We saw a body fall out of preservation. What do you think?
I mean, I think he'd probably be a similar form to preservation. I think they'd be at least on fairly equal terms to begin with. Sorry.
I mean, I would agree with you. I would say that they are ultimately likely, I mean, equal terms, I feel like, is a very, dodgy way of getting around that. What do you assume both of them are? Like, where does your mind go with either of them?
Oh, I think Ruin's a woman.
Okay.
And I think they dated at one point, and they got really pissed at each other.
Ruin and Preservation dated?
Yep. They decided to make this far-off worlds their playground, their battleground. I know I think it's pointless to gender them, but it had been. Like Preservation was at one point. So
I'm not even putting anything on that. I'm imagining a sex dungeon, to be honest. You said Far Off World as their battleground, and first instinct was sex dungeon.
I think that's how it started.
This thing. You think that's how it started? And then Ruin got a little bit too much and Preservation locked them away.
He forgot the safe word.
Forgot the safe word. For sure forgot the safe word. Good call. I'm keeping that as a prediction. We'll talk about it in 2 weeks. Oh, man. All right. I love the scene here with a map painting out the economy of the empire itself. They begin to search for a pattern in where these cities are located, and they're all built on or near metal reserves. But the way they're communicating this information through this physical map, and Ruin sees that map. And so she begins to silently piece together information, isolating her thoughts and herself as much as possible from that influence going forward, having realized the mistakes that she's made in order to try to win Yeoman over at the same time as trying to work out what to do about Ruin.
So I think I missed some of the explicit points there when I was reading it, because I had taken it as like she was just kind of mumbling to herself, but still saying it out loud. But I think I'm wrong. I think she was actually being silent. Is that the case?
Yes, predominantly.
Okay.
For most of this, she's completely silent. She's very particular about what she says and what she doesn't say, but she does kind of like bounce back and forth, thinking about what she should be saying out loud and what she should be holding in, which is rare and different for Vin. A little bit more impulsive generally with what she says.
That's true. She very much so is more impulsive. That was another thing that I don't remember where it got brought up, but it got brought up a few different times, talking about how Ruin preferred people that were very impulsive and less logical. And Vin and Elend, very clearly impulsive people. And well, not so much impulsive, but trust your gut kind of people, which in essence works in the same way, because being able to influence their gut feeling that they trust innately is the same as just influencing an impulsive decision. I wanted to bring that up somewhere. Don't remember where, but it's here now.
I think that's a good point, though. I would argue a little bit that Elend is less impulsive, but he does trust his gut. He thinks about it a lot more before trusting his gut, I think, than Vin does, at the very least. He's got a better gut biome, so he also is just on a different level, you know?
He's drinking that kombucha every day.
He's built different. It's that booch. Got to figure out Ellen's booch recipe.
Do you think he flavors his kombucha?
With ash, yeah.
Ah, all right.
Ash flavored kombucha. Come on. Who wouldn't do it?
Oh.
I fruit up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Simultaneously, the worst parts of kombucha and cigars just blended together.
Great point. Terrifying, really.
That said, I actually really enjoy unflavored kombucha. Like
unflavored kombucha?
Yeah, like not fruited.
Oh, I've never had unfruited kombucha. I don't think. I don't think that I have.
Fermented tea.
Yeah, I mean, I like tea. Fermented tea would be probably pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeasty tea.
All right, let's continue.
Yeasty.
Anyway, okay. Fuck you.
That one was good, and you know it. All right.
Yes.
All right. Oh, God. Okay. I'm going to recover. But then the doors burst open and an Inquisitor walks in, and the obligators bow to it, including Yeoman. And of course, it's Marsh. Marsh, this tool of Ruin, is here to mess up the plan and collect the ATM. But then there's a no yell from Ruin, and he evaporates from Ruin and becomes a black mist as Vin pushes into his mind. That's here, right? Wait a second.
I mean,
Am I losing my mind?
Yes, that's here.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Reen melts into Ruin, not Marsh. For some reason, my brain was jumping forward. But when there's the revelation that there isn't any ATM here, he dissolves and freaks out. Ruin does. Marsh physically reacts as well. But it's interesting to have these two different kind of pieces of the conversation be going on in the same room at the same time, as Vin sees.
I love how even this late in the story, we're being drip-fed information, and I am gobbling this shit up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just little by little, we're understanding the actual limits of what Ruin is able to know. And additionally, we're able to understand that he's able to lose form when he has some sort of outburst, which tells me he's like concentrating on maintaining the form of Reen to some extent. Maybe that's insignificant and tiny, but it's something. Like, it's something that he's relinquishing when he like has a sudden outburst of anger. I don't know what that means or if there's any actual useful implications of it other than the fact that like he's not as calm and collected as we're made to believe. But that dark swirling black grossness before collecting itself back into Reen was pretty terrifying, huh?
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that I question inside of the scene too is why Yeoman doesn't question Marsh. And I realize that that's a question of faith and his faith in the Lord Ruler and the regime and the idea that these Inquisitors are the high priests, right? But like, how does Marsh know that you told the girl earlier that she has the ATM? Like, why isn't he asking that question? You know,
the Lord Ruler told him.
That's not what Marsh says, though. Marsh doesn't. There's no retort. There's no.
No, he can believe whatever he wants. No, I agree.
Yeah,
that's a little odd. But what I think is really funny is that these obligators are bowing to the Inquisitor when, like, one of the last things that the Lord Ruler did was put the Inquisitors at the top of the hierarchy, above the obligators.
It's true. Yeah. So it went from the obligators holding all of the important information to the Inquisitors at the very end, which seems to, again, be another influence of Ruin, likely, in those last days. You know, him just kind of hand-waving it away because he's like, whatever, it doesn't matter. We're too close to the well coming back for me to worry about this petty bullshit. I think that's why he gives up on it. But now that we know kind of the whole story behind the well, that adds a little bit of context there.
Yep. To
that decision. And killing Tintikiel, Vin's father? Yeah. Sounds right. There's another little thing here that happens shortly thereafter as, you know, kind of screams and melts and other things like that. Marsh says, but you are doomed. Yes, doomed indeed, which is a great callback to the first book when the Lord Ruler suggests the end of the world is coming, you know?
Yeah. Almost explicit. Like, he uses the word doomed as well, yeah?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he says something like, you don't know what you've done. You've doomed yourselves. Or something like that. It's pretty close to that. So yeah, man, he was so close. He was so close to being able to do something against Ruin, and now Ruin is here bringing doom. And you know, I think what's so great in the reality here in this moment is that some part of Ruin must have been there in that moment to know to recite this in front of Vin to call back to it. And I think at the same time, there's a part of the Lord Ruler that knows that this was orchestrated by Ruin to kill him, you know? Like, I think in his dying moments, he's not looking at the little girl who killed him. He's looking at the god in the background who was likely standing there waving as he talked, you know, or at the very least, you know, inside of his consciousness in some small regard.
Yeah, through the hemalurgical spikes.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Woo! It really does twist that fight scene, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. It really, well, it changes the context of the entire first book, right? Like, we're actively working to like pull down this empire where the bad guys won, right? And that's kind of the perspective. But in reality, the bad guys were a force for preserving, preservation strictly, but like keeping him alive. So, yeah. Trying to be unchanging. We end this chapter with two different moments of faith. Yeoman's faith is shattered by Marsh's reveal that the truth that Vin tells about the death of the Lord Ruler and about what's to come, as well as Vin placing her faith in Elend that he won't attack.
Yeah, I get that Yeoman really hasn't been in this story for very long, but god damn it, just Branderson do an amazing job of building up these characters so fucking quickly. Like, at this point, I really do feel for him. I really feel for the loss of his faith and the shattering of his internal understanding of what's been going on the last couple of years. Like, it is crushing for this man that a few chapters ago we had really almost no interaction with. Like, it was a couple weeks ago that we met him for the first time, that ball.
Yeah, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, something like that.
Wild.
It's crazy because he's also, for a majority of this book, I mean, he's not the primary antagonist, but he is a or he's, a secondary antagonist for the story, as is Quellion, right? These two humans, and then we've got Ruin. And that just makes for such an interesting backing to also be so emotionally, not necessarily invested, but to see a depth of emotion from this character and to basically be able to go like, oh, well, he is just human. Like, he is, unlike Straff Venture, of whom was firmly just a piece of shit, who had no redeeming qualities, or even Zane, of whom was a little bit more relatable, but just kind of twisted and corrupted, or the Lord Ruler, of whom we know. Like, Yeoman's the most gray of all of the villains, because really he's just trying to do the best he can.
Yeah. I want to know, still, speaking of, how did Zane end up with that spike in his chest? That's a big fucking spike, dude.
Yeah.
Failed Inquisitor. Yep.
Who knows? Spike, though. So with that, we go into chapter 64. Really, really short chapter here. Logbook. One might notice that Ruin did not send his Inquisitors to Fadrix until after Yeoman had, apparently, confirmed that the A-Team was there in the city. Why not send them as soon as the final cache was located? Where were his minions in all of this? One must realize that, in Ruin's mind, all men were his minions, particularly those whom he could manipulate directly. He didn't send an Inquisitor because they were busy doing other tasks. Instead, he sent someone who, in his mind, was exactly the same thing as an Inquisitor. He tried to spike Yeoman, failed, and by that time, Elend's army had arrived. So he used a different pawn to investigate the cache for him, and discovered if the A-Team really was there or not. He didn't commit too many resources to the city at first, fearing a deception on the Lord Ruler's part. Like him, I still wonder if the caches were, in part, intended for just that purpose, to distract Ruin and keep him occupied.
So I feel like that brings into question a lot of what we actually know. Like, who is this same as an Inquisitor, but not, that was tried? Like, is he saying, is that what he's saying about Yeoman? Because he's an obligator, very similarly, like, entrusting his faith to the Lord Ruler, blah, 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 like, tried to spike him and failed. Or is it somebody else entirely? I'm not sure what he means by that. Or the investigation by somebody else. I don't know. I feel like I'm confusing myself right now, and I'm not sure why.
I think you're digging a deeper hole than you need to. The person writing this logbook is very explicitly dancing around a name, and that name is Vin, very clearly.
Okay.
Because Vin was the one who investigated the cache, right?
Right.
Was the tool at which was used to expose. Because he could speak to Vin through the earring, as we've discussed, through the hemorrhagical spike, right?
Right. Okay. Yep.
So
you're right. I was digging way deeper of a hole than I needed to.
I mean, and to be fair, I think that that's kind of the way that this is. I mean, I don't know if it's intentionally trying to mislead you as heavily as you're misleading yourself or were misleading yourself. But I think that it's dancing around the name because it's keeping a name on the list for who this logbook writer is.
That's true.
Because why would you refer to yourself in the third person that way?
But why wouldn't you just write Vin? Because I feel like Vin has been mentioned in the logbooks before.
Why would you write about yourself in the third person that way? I don't think Vin has. Unfortunately, there are too many for me to search easily. Actually, I might be able to...
No, it's okay.
I'm going to look this up in the background while we continue forward. But
because I thought I had entirely like written off Vin as an answer because, well, one, because I'm still just convinced that it's Sazed, but two, because I thought it mentioned both Vin and Elend by name at certain points.
I'm pretty sure it only mentioned Elend. Yeah. Cool. So, very short chapter. We're finally back with Spook, and the man, he is in rough shape. We open up this chapter with Spook in a dream saying that he must send the message. I love that we get this sort of hospital scene with all of his friends around him as he wakes up, Breeze, Beldra, and everyone trying to make sure that the survivor of the flames is okay.
I'm conflicted by this. Because, like, obviously it's a great thing that he survived that last trial. But I really do feel like this would have been that would have been a nice poetic end to his story. Because he got everything that he wanted. His character arc was so perfect, and it ended in a point of martyrdom. It was just beautiful, but now it's not the end anymore. But at the same time, he's the survivor of the flames. He survived the flames. So, there's that.
Yeah, I think that it's so deeply interesting that this makes him the real survivor of the flames as opposed to his previous, saving. Although there was one attempt very early that he did on his own. This just, again, reiterates, I think he did a hat trick of surviving the flames and making his way through. So,
right.
Yeah,
it's true.
I really enjoy it. I think that it's great. And I agree with you on the conflict, because while it would be excellent to have, a serious character death, just to have, and I don't mean that I think that it imparts more meaning, but I think that it would complete his arc in a very satisfying way to have him die. I think it just says that Spook, maybe there's more to come for Spook. I think that that's often the way that Brandon would lead something like this, is like, you die when you're worthless to me, or like when it makes the most sense for the plot to like have that happen. But this isn't the end for Spook, perhaps. Fair. So, of course, the second thing to talk about in this chapter is the control that was being exerted on the citizen and Spook. Spook instructs Goridel to bring him a metal plate so that he can inscribe a message with the hope of helping save Vin's life. And Goridel himself will run it to her, which is just a fascinating full circle. Like, it's a fantastic full circle moment for this man.
And we get a pretty explicit rationalization from Goridel on why he would run it there, right? Like, talking about how she saved him. I can't remember the exact terms that he used, but it was a very nice full circle moment. Even though we've had full circle moments with him being the savior of things several times over, this one feels doubly meaningful, I think.
Yeah. It is doubly meaningful. It's this, like, he's been so critical, and this example of, I mean, he hasn't been critical necessarily, but he's been all over the place and he's been important. And it's just this idea that, like, Kelsier was wrong in his approach, and it's just paid dividends since the very beginning in this winning of faith. It saved her very early on, and now it's going to save her again at this point with that delivery of information, and kind of as much and how much information that might be. So, yeah. And to the extent that connects. So, because obviously I don't think Vin's worked out the fact that the spike is connected to her appearance of Rune and Reen. She's just connected that Rune and Reen are the same.
Yeah.
So this is that final dot. We've connected it, though, because we have enough context and understanding from Spook's point of view that we're like, oh shit, well, this is obvious.
Well, and even before that, the logbook talking about hemalurgic spikes and how it augments piercing copper clouds.
Right. And there are different pieces to kind of put together there for sure. The thing I do want to mention is I did look it up. There is no mention of Vin in the logbook.
Okay. Cool.
Yep. There you go. With that, we end the really short chapter 64 and we go into chapter 65. We've got a logbook here. Ooh, she's a long one. All right. In those moments when the Lord Ruler both held the power at the well and was feeling it drain away from him, he understood a great many things. He saw the power of Feruchemi and rightly feared it. Many of the Terrace people he knew would reject him as the hero, for he didn't fulfill their prophecies well. They'd see him as an usurper who killed the hero they sent, which in truth he was. I think over the years, Rune would subtly twist him and make him do terrible things to his own people. But at the beginning, I suspect his decision against them was motivated more by logic than emotion. He was about to unveil a grand power in the Mistborn. He could have, I suppose, kept Allomancy secret and used Feruchemists as his primary warriors and assassins. However, I think he was wise to choose as he did. Feruchemists, by the nature of their powers, have a tendency towards scholarship. With their incredible memories, they would have been very difficult to control over the centuries. Indeed, they were difficult to control even when he suppressed them. Allomancy not only provided a spectacular new ability without that drawback, it offered a mystical power he could use to bribe kings to his side.
Lots of really, really cool stuff in that, not least of which is a further explanation of why the Lord Ruler did the terrible things to his people that he did. And that's, I don't know, man, fucking ruin. Wash my hands clean of that shit. It's all ruin. I joke, but in truth, that makes a ton of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine what things would have been like without Allomancy. If Allomancy and Feruchemi were flipped, that would have been fucking wild.
Mm-hmm. It would have been really crazy. It would have been very, very different. Because Feruchemi's interesting because it's like you have to like sit still in order to store speed, you know? You have to like walk slow for a long time. You have to spend more time sleeping. You have to spend time sick to like store healing. Like there are all kinds of interesting implications.
Yeah. But also everyone's on level footing. Like there's no Feruchemist that can only use copper or anything like that. Like
right.
Everyone can access everything.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Everyone's got full capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So far as we're aware, again, but I don't think that there hasn't been any indication otherwise. So,
yeah. The one thing I could think of would be the ability to use somebody else's metal mines.
What do you mean?
That would be the one thing that could set a Feruchemist apart from others.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
their ability to use a different metal mine, or the ability to use any other metal mine. Totally. That makes sense. All right. This is our final chapter of the week. We got a bit to talk about. It's kind of fast-paced, but we'll go as it goes. So I love how this chapter begins with Elend and Ham really makes a statement about not going on a rampage now and doesn't explain. It's a nice note of character-driven humor to not see him be overwrought in this moment, and they both agree and have the soldiers pull back from their anticipated siege that they were about to go on.
Yeah, I like that too. And what I really liked about it was the fact that Ham was genuinely surprised that Ellen silently came to this same conclusion that he did. But still, there's just so much that goes unsaid but is understood between the two of them. And I don't know, I think they're both starting to face the weight of everything that's been put on them. Whereas before, I feel like Ham would have, first of all, spoken up. And second of all, if he hadn't, he would have made comment about Ellen's decision-making process. And the fact that isn't necessary here was kind of a depressing realization of how much is burdening them,
Right. How much these different choices are kind of holding them down. I think it also adds a layer because it really paints Ham as this person, if we think back to the Final Empire and we think back to the Well of Ascension, Ham was always a lover who found a home around fighters. You know what I mean? He was the leader from the front. He was a protector first and foremost. He knew when to fight and when not to fight, when to run away, when to attack, when to hold, when to press. But he's never been one to advocate for violence. And so I think that's what's great here is that this is also a full circle moment where it's no, we're not going to attack. We should not attack. It goes against his kind of moral principles, his moral base as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels right.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Sam. But then we move to Vin, and she's right and comes to some really big conclusions in the face of Rune and Marsh, both reacting physically to what she's saying out loud. That metal is more than unalterable. To Rune, it's blinding. And that's why he's been unable to search these caches, and has, like the last logbook in chapter 64 said, had a different minion basically go and do it for him.
Yeah, this makes so much goddamn sense. And everything just makes more sense. And I'm mad at how much it makes sense now.
Because the Lord Ruler knew enough, you know? Like, the Lord Ruler knew enough to hold him at bay.
How did he find out? Oh, he had the power of creation in his hands for like a couple minutes or something.
Yeah, he was a god, for a hot sec.
Yeah.
It is pretty great. It's crazy to see, to also have like these small moments of vindication for the Lord Ruler, right? Like
vindication. Sorry.
I didn't even mean that one. But to have these moments where it's like, oh, the Lord Ruler was right. But there is at least one problem with that, which is that he still subjugated the Ska. It does bring into question how much overall influence Rune had over the course of centuries and generations, and like what he really brought into the system, because we know of the terrible things that he, of course, encouraged the Lord Ruler to do to the Terrace people and things like that. It does just bring into this question of like, to what degree was the Lord Ruler really a strictly bad dude? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that he can be absolved of all of his sins, but I think that there are a number that we can at the very least go, well, it wasn't entirely your fault.
I mean, I think it depends on what sort of scope you're looking at it from. I still think that
scope is important, yes, for sure.
His entire goal, his primary goal, was not anything to do with the actual like well-being of the people. Mm-hmm. Straight up. It's just the preservation of the planet. Mm-hmm. The planet itself, not so the fact that he had to subjugate his people to prevent them from overturning his rule, truly was in his mind a fair trade for saving the planet. And whether or not that's a poisoned take is, I don't know, hard to parse in a single.
It really is, because there's the like, what's the long-term scope of the choices made here? Because in reality, if the Lord Ruler thinks that he's immortal and subjugates a people to torture for 1,000 years, but then is able to adjust the world again and fix the problems that he created in the first place when he picked up the power, and then brings out 1,000 years of like perpetual preservation without torture, you know, like what do you say to that proposal? And I feel like that's kind of how he was approaching it, is how do we stay the hand for as long as possible?
Yeah. I mean, you kind of have to view it from the timeline of a god in that respect.
Right. Entirely. And that's what makes it so difficult to, I think, really come to a conclusion, to like a solid piece of evidence on where to land on the Lord Ruler.
Mm-hmm.
So Rune demands through Marsh and that yeomen send the men to fight Helen's occupying force of Kolos, despite the improbability of their win, and he bends to his will. We move to Elend, and he retreats, realizing the futility of their attempt to push through the ash, and that this is a way that he can avoid expending life. The futility being the men of yeomans, of course. This infuriates Rune, because we jump back and forth like 3 times here, as Vin also feigns that she knows that Rune has been after the ATM the whole time. There's a lot here that happens in a very short amount of time.
So I felt like the delivery of sort of dropping the idea that we knew the whole time that you were looking for the ATM was a little weak. But the fact that she came up with it on the fly and everything's so chaotic in the moment, like it makes it work, and it makes it pretty believable. I do think I actually have a guess on where the ATM is. I don't know if this is like the right place to guess that. What do you think?
I think so.
Okay. I think it's hidden basically as a core within each of the spikes for the Inquisitors. And I know I had a guess similar to that previously, that there were like other spikes made entirely of atium. So this is a departure from that, but is still kind of running on the same idea, in that if you were to have a thin layer of metal around atium, you'd probably only be able to detect that metal specifically. And if it passes through something, like it would just act as that type of metal, you know? And that, I feel like, could explain some changes that have been made within the ranks of the Inquisitors since the Lord Ruler died, because the spikes have been forged in different ways and are probably entirely purely the metal that they're using. And I don't think that changes the strength. I think they talked about that the strength doesn't change based on the size of the spike, but just alters how quickly that power diminishes. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's established that the size of the spike doesn't matter as far as like power goes. Like it can still impart the same amount of power regardless of if it's a large spike or a small spike. But what matters is the size of the spike and how quickly that power leaches from itself. So a larger spike leaches slower than a small spike does. I think that's how they made that work.
I believe that is in context to the... I believe the context provided there is relating most directly to the relationship that the spike has to ruin, not just strictly its power. Does that make sense?
I think so.
The big spike still loses power, but I think the reason... So the scene that you're referencing is the one that when we go back with Marsh, and Marsh has killed the woman with the spike, but it doesn't matter. It was a tiny spike. It doesn't matter. It likely has lost most of its power, but that's okay because we don't want the power. We just want spike. So, Sorry, I'm just double checking here. Okay. So, yeah, size matters a little bit less, although it does have some implications, but the longer it is outside of a body, the weaker it is.
Right.
That is like the top level rule.
Yeah. And I think the idea was a larger spike could last longer outside of a body than a smaller spike could. Like they leached, the power leached out of the smaller spike faster than the bigger one. I don't know. We're getting super into the weeds on a guess that's only tangential.
It is a prediction, so I think that's interesting to think that atium is connected here.
And I think it's truly just like an ironic hiding place for the atium. Like it's not actually giving any power. It's just hidden in plain sight, so to speak.
Well, kind of like, I mean, Vin's earring is coated in silver, right? Like her bronze earring was coated in silver for a long time, but obviously that had flaked off. It was leafed.
Oh, right.
So,
forgot about that.
Yeah, in a similar way. So, yeah, interesting. Okay, we'll log that one as a prediction. I think that's reasonable. We'll talk about it in 3 weeks. So, okay, cool. Sounds good. So then Vin manages to pull off a great feat of thievery. She steals Marsh's vial of allomantic metals and turns Mistborn once again. Of course, this doesn't change her or anything, but she has the abilities, and so she's Mistborn once again. She throws her earring, a piece of metal that Kelsier said could be useful to keep for emergencies, straight through his brother's head, Marsh, which I find just like a little bit deliciously ironic. It's just this nice little touch, because that's ultimately why part of the reason that she had decided to keep it. And she also thought that it could be useful in emergencies. So as long as it was pierced through the ear, right? So she then pulls an incredible ploy here as well, sending her small group of 1,000 Koloss. She creates the chaos that she wanted, a small battalion fighting against Yeoman's men, and that gets him to change his plans against Ruin, because she was trying to convince him, of what was going on with the Koloss at large.
It is really poetic about that earring, huh?
I think so. I think it's
even
awesome.
If it wasn't an allomantic spike, having that sort of note from Kelsier being used against his own brother is really something. So like that would have been a nice subtle payoff regardless. Not that, I mean, he comes back, so, it is what it is. But I really appreciated how poetic that could have been. I think there's something that you skipped.
What'd I skip?
The fact that Ruin just snapped his fingers and stole all the Koloss? Or did you mention that?
Oh, shit. I did skip that entirely. Fuck. So, but I think it is important to talk about. So, I mean, how do we want to go about this? You know, I mean, like we said, one of the crazy things that happens inside of this is that Rune shows more powers, right? And Rune rips the Koloss away from Elend's control, and that, you know, changes the paradigm, shifts the paradigm. And I really love it, because this whole scene to some degree is a large testing of faith for Yeoman, in the sort of immediacy of like, why should I be faithful to this thing that is causing so much pain and harm? This turns, and that's kind of where the ploy comes in that we were just talking about a second ago. But changing the paradigm,
it proves how necessary it was for him to act subtly, because because he can't interact with metals. And clearly he needs atium for some reason. Still don't quite know that yet, but he does. Because of that, he has to act as subtly as possible and like nudge people and like work within the confines of this chessboard and like work with these pawns. But really, he can just like clap his hands a couple times and just own fucking everyone if he wants to.
Yeah. I think it's such a great moment that happens, because again, cutting to Elend and seeing that get ripped away is just brutal.
So I think one of the sort of mysteries for me, but something that didn't go unnoticed, is it doesn't seem like he took control of the Koloss within a specific area. He took control of whatever Elend had control of. Like he took the reins from Elend specifically. And that is evidenced by the fact that Vin maintained control of her 1,000, which were within the same ranks, I think, right? Like
they were separate, buried under ash, so they were kind of obscured.
Okay. Then that fucks that entire theory. Never mind.
But I still think you're right about it grabbing Elend's, because those were the active Koloss at the time, right? And so it rips it from him. Another small thing I think too is that this goes to show just how effective Ruin was in his sort of plotting over the course of the story, right? Because he has been letting Elend and Vin get control of these, when in reality, he could have ripped them back whenever the hell he wanted. They posed no risk or threat to him, and in fact, they threatened more danger and more destruction, so it was just better for him to let him have them just in case, you know? And they've basically been moving them around for him.
Yeah. And don't think it's gone unremembered that Marsh was overlooking an army of 300,000?
Something like that.
Sometime in the middle of the book. So,
there's a couple.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few.
Yeah, just a couple. Yeah, I don't know.
Ouch.
Yeah, that's gonna be an issue. So, moving back to linear time, Marsh gets up and begins to use feruchemy, much to Vin's shock and chagrin. Marsh had saved her life at the end of the very first book and is here strangling it out of her. But then the mists swirl around her and channel into her, and she pushes on Marsh's emotions, and he cracks pretty significantly. He has this break. She sees into him and sees this deep pain and the joy that Ruin was also bringing to him, and he runs.
So I think I figured it out.
Okay. What'd you figure out first?
The only time that Vin has been able to channel the mists are also the only times that she's fought a feruchemist.
Folks listening at home, this is why correlation and causation do not good bedfellows make.
I don't know, man. It seems pretty ironclad to me.
Yeah. That's fair.
Is it?
It is.
Okay.
I mean, I'll give you the credit.
I'll take it. You know what? All I want is just a little bit of credit.
Do you have any actual thoughts about the mists?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just let me rethink my entire idea real quick.
Do you have further explanation on why you think that would be the case while fighting feruchemists?
Because the mists hate feruchemists.
Just assholes, apparently. Okay.
I don't. I feel like it has something to do with, and I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I really don't know.
All right.
Because it's
Fair
convenient.
Because it's convenient. You just accidentally described a Deus Ex Machina.
Yep.
Okay. Cool. Well, we can leave that there. Obviously, we've got 2 more episodes for that to get resolved, so we'll figure that out soon. With that, the last thing to talk about this week before we get to the final logbook is Vin flying out the window. I'm not even drinking. Like, there's no alcohol. I just can't talk today. Ever since I fucked with my jaw at the beginning of the episode, it's been fine, but, it's... Anyway, Vin flies out the window to Elend, who is fighting, cleaving through as many Colossus as he could, before retreating briefly to attempt to make a plan, when Vin lands next to him and tells him he can retreat into the city. And I think it's fair to say that our sanderlanch is begun.
Now it's starting.
Well, not right now,
not like
but
40 pages ago, or
I mean, like, it could have even you
section.
could have considered like the end of Spook's chapter into this. Like, it could be, we could be in the middle of it. Really, I mean, who's to say?
It's fluid.
It's fluid. As sanderlanch avalanche, it happens, it cascades, and then it takes a little break, and it goes into the trees, and then it gets past the trees, and it goes faster. And yeah, must be how it works.
It is. Yep.
Needless to say, cool scene with Elend fighting the Colossus. Nothing crazy. It's a pretty quick cut again, but it's where we end our chapter with a couple
get a cool,
reunited.
I don't know, cheesy phrase to end this chapter on from Vin. What does she say? Oh, I got delayed by an Inquisitor and a Dark God. So now hustle. I'll see if I can distract them I'll go see if I can distract some of those Colossus.
Yeah.
What a phrase to end the chapter on, Crossland. It's like you got to choose the places we stop.
Oh, man. Leave you on a nice little soft cliffhanger here for the week. At least someone's life isn't hanging in the balance or anything dramatic like that. Like, at least it's not something like that where someone's maybe dead.
You mean like the entire
I did that
empire?
last week?
The whole army? All of our characters? But yes, you did do that to us last week.
Yeah, I literally did that last week. So, yeah. Yep. All right. Well, PJ, sweet. With that, we've got just our logbook. So, logbook here. Inquisitors had little chance of resisting ruin. They had more spikes than any of his other hemalurgic creations, and that put them completely under his domination. Yes, it would have taken a man of supreme will to resist ruin even slightly while bearing the spikes of an Inquisitor.
I think we have that man.
You do?
I think we know that man.
You think we know that man?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. You think it's
the man that's
Martian
been
boy?
tricking? It's all a long con. He's going to go ahead and kill our main character for the long con. I can take control back whenever I want. I'm Marsh.
So you think Marsh is in it for the long con, huh? Okay. Cool. Yeah? No?
I think the idea is that he'll, at a dire moment, not that we haven't already had one, but he'll exert a force of will and kind of fuck up a little bit of one of Ruin's strides. That's my guess.
Okay. All right. Sounds legit. I dig it. Cool. Well, with that, since we are skipping PJ's predictions and holding them until the end, our own Hero of Ages wrap-up episode that we're doing by ourselves, we're going to hang on to this. That said, if you have any questions that you want to submit for PJ and I to answer, please do so to the email or to any of the social medias that I have listed. Send them to us. That way I can kind of filter through them for the end of the series and make mention of any topics you might want us to tackle. So, cool. Next week, we read chapters 66 through 75. 66 through 75. It seems like a lot of chapters staring at it. That's 10 chapters, but because we read through, right? So, but it's only 72 pages, so it's not even that crazy of a reading. It's very similar to this week's reading. It's just, It's actually shorter than... No, it's not quite shorter. Shorter than last week's reading, but should be a fun time. So that's where we'll leave you for this week.
thank you, as ever, to Tim and Andrew for helping us keep our show going. You can check all of the links in our show notes. You can find our schedule, Patreon, previous episodes, websites, all of our social media accounts in one very convenient location.
Yes, and very soon we will also have our Atomic Pylon website up so that you can check out all of the other shows that we've got coming out variously. It should be a very exciting time. We are super duper pumped for everything else that we have coming out. Again, like PJ had mentioned, you can find us at Words Whiskey Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, wordsandwhiskeyshow@gmail.com, patreon.com/words and whiskey, and t-shirts on TeePublic. If you're too lazy to search for any of those individual things, you can find them in the convenient link. We have them for you. All you have to do is click. You can join our Discord by joining our Patreon as well as Devil's Cuts. We release basically 20 minutes-ish, 20 to 30-minute episodes weekly that kind of accompany these as warm-ups and some fun conversation about kind of how our week's going or other topics icebreakers submitted, and any long bits that we cut from the regular episodes as well. So if we ever go on a random tirade about something and decide, not main feed worthy, it ends up in those. So come check it out.
Yes, you should. And chat with us on our Discord. Because we spend most of our day on there.
It's true. With that, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.